Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy President. Nearly 2 months ago I addressed the Senate on why a trade deal with China was so important for our farmers, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be standing here tonight to say that the Abbott Truss government has once again delivered. The signing of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement yesterday concludes a powerful trifecta of agreements with our major trading partners in North Asia, Japan, Korea and now China. These economies alone already account for more than 60% of our exports of goods, and it's particularly pleasing as a Victorian senator because many of these goods, services and commodities come from my home state, which as Australia's largest food and fibre exporting state is particularly well placed to reap the benefits of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. We are, as we like to call it, the great state of ag. Also, one of our key exports is obviously the education services. So the China Trade Agreement itself will give farmers and agriculture access to an export market currently worth around $9 billion, ultimately benefiting our regional communities. And I'd like to pay particular tribute to the Minister for Agriculture in Victoria, Peter Walsh, who over the last 3 years, as that fabulous government under both premiers, have undertaken super trade missions right throughout China, Japan, Malaysia, the Gulf states, where our businesses and our producers, our manufacturers can start building relationships and making those connections that a free trade agreement then allows them to capitalise on, and access for the clean, green, fabulous produce of Victoria. So thank you, Premier Napthine and Minister Walsh. Victoria's largest rural industry is the dairy industry, and they made it clear that the outcome they were seeking was an equivalent or better trade deal with China than New Zealand currently has. And the industry is understandably delighted that the Australian government has put them on a more competitive footing to their trans-Tasman cousin, in that the China FTA is less restrictive, with most Australian dairy products receiving unlimited preferential access to China's export market, now worth more than $351 million. It will also see tariffs as high as 20% on dairy products eliminated within 4 to 11 years, and it's great news for the Victorian dairy industry, which supplies around 86% of Australia's dairy product exports, employing nearly 20,000 people. Australian dairy farmers confirms that the China Free Trade Agreement will progressively close the gap in the competition with other countries. Australian Dairy Industry Council Chair Noel Campbell said, and I quote, "The FTA in the long term will allow the Australian dairy industry to flourish and capitalise upon robust demand in the Chinese market. It will strengthen Australia's dairy competitiveness by providing the Australian dairy industry with significant advantage compared to other countries in the market that do not have an FTA with China." And he adds, "This is truly a free trade agreement. Australian dairy has been a leading commodity in the negotiations with China. We have campaigned long and hard for a positive outcome, and we are thrilled to see this come to fruition." Understandably so, with China being Australia's fastest growing dairy market, with total dairy exports in the region totalling nearly 1.9 million tonnes in 2013 alone. With demand for dairy in this region to rapidly increase in coming years, stable and open trade with China is a key in order for Australian dairy to capitalise on the opportunity for growth. Similar, the UDV President, Tyrion Jones, said, and I quote, "It will be reasonable to expect that increased world demand for our dairy products should be reflected in increased farm gate prices." And so this goes to the the heart of what we're doing, not only in trade, but in the agricultural portfolios. And that is to ensure that we get a greater return to the farm gate, and that's exactly what Ministers Robb and Joyce have been focused on in negotiating these key agreements. Other agricultural industries in Victoria will be similarly competitive position. Wine, right through the Yarra Valley, our Rutherglen Shiraz, up north to get some whites, but I just wanted to basically give a quote from the De Bortoli Export Director, adding that the trade agreement will make Australia a bigger player on the international wine scene. And I quote, "This is fantastic news for the Australian wine industry. We've already got a fantastic reputation in China for our premium wines, and this will allow us to compete with other major wine exporters." Preferential access. Fantastic, against the French, against the Californians, against the South Americans, to get our fabulous Australian wines into the market of China. Horticulture, another key agricultural commodity group within the Victorian makeup and diversity. Most tariffs ranging from 10 to 30% will be eliminated within 4 years, again welcomed by industry. And I quote AusVeg spokesperson Andrew McDonald, this agreement will cement China as a key destination for Australian vegetable exports, and it is hoped that this will benefit regional communities across the country by creating jobs and boosting economies. Because at the end of the day, that is what free trade agreements are about. They are about local jobs in local communities for Australians. It's a good news story. For sheep meat, beef, processed foods, etc., and Senator Abetz went through a raft of measures under the free trade agreement where regional communities in particular can prosper under the free trade agreement. These opportunities are expected to grow, with ABARES predicting China will account for 43% of all growth worldwide in agricultural demand to 2050. And importantly, there are no changes to Australia's risk-based quarantine measures as part of the FTA. The resources, energy and manufacturing industries will also benefit. And the agreement includes recognition of all private education institutions in addition to our universities, which are already listed on the official Ministry for Education website for overseas students. This will provide potential Chinese students with more options to study in Australia and more business for Australian education providers. Education Minister Christopher Pyne also signed an Australia-China Memorandum of Understanding on student, researcher and academic mobility as part of the new Colombo Plan in China from 2015. And this will facilitate greater mobility of students, researchers and academics between the two countries, a move welcomed by University Australia. And I quote, "The landmark China-Australia Free Trade Agreement signed in Canberra will foster an even deeper relationship with China in university education and research." While it's disappointing some key commodities were excluded, including wheat, rice, sugar and cotton, the agreement represents the best outcome we could achieve at this time, and importantly, it has a built-in review process so that 3 years after it enters into force, Australia and China will discuss further market access. Nevertheless, the government will continue to press for improved market access for Australian producers and exporters. Further, while Chinese investments in Australia of up to $1 billion will now be allowed without the need for review, the threshold for scrutiny by the Foreign Investment Review Board has been lowered for agricultural land to $15 million, in line with this government's election commitment. Commodities aside, the Australia-China FTA is good news for consumers. When trade barriers fall, prices fall with them, and families will benefit from lower prices for essential family goods. With the China FTA now secured, the Abbott Trust government is already focusing on the Indo-Pacific region and negotiation of a trade agreement with India over the next 12 months. Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Modi, visiting the Australian Parliament today, confirmed that there are huge opportunities for trade partnership in many areas, including agriculture, agro-processing, resources, energy, finance, infrastructure, education and science and technology. Minister Rob also confirmed trade talks are underway with Indonesia and the Gulf states. And at the request of Minister Rob, the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade is currently conducting an inquiry into trade in the Middle East, which saw nearly $15 billion in trade between our two regions last year, an area of potential and opportunity. The Victorian Coalition has also been committed to pursuing trade opportunities in the Middle East through its trade mission program, and I know that they were very, very successful ventures by the state government, and it's so essential for the state government to continue to be elected, because whilst Labor was doing nothing at a federal level for so long when it came to delivering trade results back to producers, back to manufacturers, the state government in Victoria was doing everything. And if evidence is anything, right throughout the inquiry we're conducting at the moment, the Victorian government's model of engaging in foreign countries around issues of trade is the standout model nationally of how to do business, how to get it done, how to bring it into your state, grow jobs and grow your local economy. We're looking forward to the re-election of a coalition government in the state of Victoria, and if we understand the importance of jobs and increasing productivity and investment then we have to be looking to re-elect a Victorian coalition government, because we know that Labor won't be doing anything about it. I commend the Victorian ministers and Premier, and I commend Trade Minister Rob for leadership in this area.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie.